Well, hey folks, Real Honestly with your Red Lens is a retro review of the WCW Nitro episode from December 28th, 1998. The night after Starrcade 98, that whole bungled Goldberg versus Nash main event, do you remember? I'll never forget. I'll never forget how that was the second straight Starrcade main event that was fucked up in a row. But there we go. This mainly was built around the fallout of Starrcade 98, Nash wanting to make things right with Goldberg, challenge him to a match later, like the next week. And also Flair wanting to get his hands on Bischoff after the whole bungled thing at Starrcade 98, and Flair being beat by Bischoff and wanting basically to do whatever he could to get his hands on him. Now, I do also want to say I am going to be doing a retro review of the Raw and Nitro episodes from January 4th, 1999, Foley's title win versus the Finger Poke of Doom. Either it's going to be the whole episode or it's just going to be comparing those two things. We'll see. But you like recaps because there's a lot of recaps on this show. They were in Baltimore, Maryland, so the crowd was really hot for a lot of it, especially when Flair appeared. Recaps, and then you had Bischoff, Henning, Buff, and Scott Steiner celebrating that Bischoff was the one to beat Ric Flair, and they're all celebrating in a limo. And then the announcers run down Starrcade 98. Get a brief recap of Bischoff's rise to power over the last couple of years. And 11 minutes actually of recaps and talking before we get to our first match, which is Ernest Miller versus some guy Chris Jericho brought out, Namanaga? I don't know. He was some guy that had a good look and then got beat in about 5 seconds. Ernest Miller was never really much of a wrestler. He's a pretty shit worker. I never really understood why he was there. But whatever. He was there. He won. Cool. Whatever. Then more recaps of Ric Flair having a heart attack a few weeks before. It turns out actually a bit later that his cardiologist determined that he had some kind of toxins put inside him. Food poisoning? Who knows? It was obviously Bischoff and whoever that did it. Storyline, of course. I'm not here to imply that Bischoff had actually poisoned somebody. It was just done as kind of a crazy old school Southern wrestling, promotion thing, like maybe from about 10, 15 years ago, where they would slip something in their food to make it where a wrestler could not compete. Who knows? Norman Smiley versus Chavo Guerrero Jr., it got a decent amount of time. We're 20 minutes in and on our second match already. This was given about 7-8 minutes. Of course, Chavo Guerrero at this time had a weird stick horse that he called Pepe that he communicated with and was his guiding light. Don't ask. It was still not as bad as Moppy that Perry Saturn had in WWE about 3 years later. But anyway, then we get Norman Smiley and Chavo exchanging some good wrestling, some good antics. Norman Smiley does end up getting the crossface chicken wing, however, and tap out. He wins. Cool. Okay, it was fine. And then we get a brief video package where Raven is being sent to his home. That's right. There's a reason we don't go to Raven's home. It's a Half-Life reference. One of the few Half-Life references I know. But it turns out that Raven, for all his talking and for all his talk of society, beating him down, society being against him, he actually comes from a rich home. And him and Canyon and Raven's mother are there, and Raven's mom doesn't want to let him drink. Raven seems like a spoiled brat. Doesn't really want to be there. It was odd. I think it was a way to humanize Raven, but it really didn't end up working ultimately. There were other video packages in this, I'm sure, in subsequent weeks. This was very odd. Booker T versus Vic Finley. These two had battled over the TV title before. It was decent. Brawling mixed with some good wrestling. You did have a missile dropkick by Booker T for the 1-2-3. Decent TV match. They've had better matches in the past, but it was still pretty good for what it was. We're whizzing by on this whole episode because there really wasn't a ton to talk about. I'm just recapping it just for fun. Really, that's what these retro reviews are all about. I'm not going to retro review every single Nitro episode or Thunder episode. Dear God, I'm not going to revamp every Nitro or Thunder episode. I don't have that much of a stomach. But there was one of the main selling points of this, and one of the main things that people like is Ric Flair being interviewed by Mean Gene. This is Ric Flair is coming out with a whole bunch of clothes and some money and his shoes and talking and going insane and saying, starting to take off his clothes, as Flair was known to do. This is 20 years ago when he was just a crazy old man in his late 40s. Oh boy, Flair was insane. But he's doing this, he's having a whole bunch of fun. He's just fired up like crazy. Baltimore's cheering him on. He's ripping up hundreds, which might have been legit. Flair was known to kind of waste a whole lot of money, so that might have actually been legit money. Could have been fake. Who knows? It looked pretty real to me. But he's, taking his clothes, he's saying to Bischoff, If you beat me, I want a match with you. If I win, I get control of WCW for 90 days. If I lose, you get everything I have. You get my house, you get my clothes, you get my food, you get my wife, whatever. He's willing to sign that over. Probably willing to sign Charlotte, Reed, and David over. Nope, David would come in the company a little bit later. Never forget how bad David Flair was in the ring, even though he didn't want to wrestle, so let's not harp on him too much. This was a pretty funny interview, though, because Flair throws like a shoe into the crowd and then throws another shoe into the crowd. And I'm talking like sidearms that thing where if people didn't know it was coming, that probably was going to be a lawsuit right there. But he does at one point say to Mean Gene, he's saying to Mean Gene, I want a match with Bischoff, I want a match with Bischoff. And then says, if you cut that if you turn that camera off and I'll be naked when the show comes back on. And Flair would be insane enough to do it. Afterwards, Bischoff comes out. And Flair's handcuffed to the ropes because Flair is insane, also weird, but also insane, and keeps egging on Bischoff. And Bischoff finally agrees. Says, yeah, there's no horsemen here. All my guys are here. I'll beat you up again, and I will take everything you have. So, okay, good. Really good interview. This actually was a whole lot of fun. It was a little insane, as you would expect from a Ric Flair interview, but still, it was a lot of fun. And then we go with a flashback. Barry Windham still thinking that he's in 1989, facing off against Prince Iaukea, and Barry Windham wins within 3 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe. Prince Iaukea, former TV champion, by the way. I believe former Cruiserweight champion also. He had an odd career in WCW where they kind of pushed him at first, and then they made him the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea, which was bad. But whatever. This was Barry Windham getting a Windham back, if you will, and it happened. Mean Gene then interviews a security guard or a corrections officer or something. They kind of jumped around a whole bunch of this stuff. They talked about the cattle prod that was used to knock out Goldberg, that Scott Hall used Starrcade the previous night. Okay, cool. This would lead to a taser ladder match, by the way. A few weeks later, I believe it's sold out 99 if I recall. Goldberg in a ladder match. Not a good idea. Slightly drunk Scott Hall in the ladder match. Not a good idea. But there we go. Interview with DDP was mainly hyped for Bischoff versus Flair. He said he would love to work with Ric Flair as the boss. And then we get Disco being berated by the Wolfpack. Disco Inferno being berated never gets old because the guy was fucking awful in the ring. And then we have Eddie Guerrero and Juventud Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman. It's kind of playing off the whole thing of like a triangle match that happened in Starrcade 98, which was a pretty good match. And then Kidman retained his title in a really good match right after that. So this was just kind of a way to match those matches up, and it was enjoyable. It was a really good match, given a whole lot of time, as you would expect with these guys. Really good storytelling, really good high flying. Certainly no complaints. If you don't see any other match on this show, this is the match certainly that you want to watch. Cruiserweights usually would always deliver some great matches until, they decided to have Kidman feud with Hogan, and it went absolutely nowhere. Yeah, that wasn't very good. This was also Eddie's last Nitro match for about 6 to 7 months, because he would get in that car accident. An unfortunate car, I think it might have been 6 months, but an unfortunate car accident where he was, they thought he was going to die, and it kind of led to a lot of problems that he would have. Fortunately, he cleaned up his life. Unfortunately, he did pass away at the age of 38. But yeah, crowd was into it and everything, and miscommunication did, however, lead to Kidman being pinned by Eddie Guerrero after a frog splash for the 1-2-3. So again, really good match, really worth checking out. And then we get a Kevin Nash promo. He talks Starrcade 98, talks Scott Hall, and talks about giving Goldberg a shot in the Georgia Dome next week. So yes, again, I will be reviewing those the Raw and Nitro episodes, Finger Poke of Doom versus Foley's title win, and compare how basically WCW did. I might just review those ending segments. I don't know if I'm going to have time to review both episodes, but I might just compare both of those things, because that's 5 hours. That's, even out of commercials, that's about 3.5 to 4 hours of wrestling to watch. That's a lot of wrestling. We'll see. But anyway, then we get Disco Inferno versus Bam Bam Bigelow. Basically, the idea is, in the earlier Nash promo, Nash says, okay, Disco, you interfered in my match and almost cost me a title. You want to be in the Wolfpack? You got to beat this handpicked opponent. It's Bam Bam Bigelow. I hate Disco Inferno, by the way, because the guy, piece of shit, couldn't wrestle, couldn't work at all. I don't ever know why he was over at all. Bam Bam ends up beating him. Greens from Asbury Park. Spikes Disco on his head. Well, safely. He didn't actually do that. Bam Bam was never the one to injure his opponents. And 1, 2, 3, so Disco is not in the Wolfpack. Tremendous, because we don't need, that piece of shit clogging that thing up. Even if the Wolfpack wasn't all that great. Bam Bam wins. Yay! And then Ric Flair's cardiologist talks about the fact that Ric Flair was poisoned. Okay. And Steiner promo. Big Papa Pump at your hookup. Holler if you hear me. He faces off against Conan for the TV title. And after a whole bunch of interference, Buck Bagwell and Lex Luger having this run around, it looked like a Benny Hill sketch or whatever. It was ridiculous, even though I'm pretty certain that Lex Luger, actually Lex Luger wrestling to that music, playing the Benny Hill music over his matches might actually be a whole lot better. Because Benny Hill was more entertained than watching Lex Luger in the ring. I don't like Lex Luger, can you tell? But the NWO referee gets attacked before the bell. Scott Dickinson gets brought in. It was slow and boring as you would expect. Conan did fine. But Scott Steiner, in the end, after a whole big amount of interference behind the referee's back, even though the referee could see some of this, Steiner recliner, Conan taps out, new TV champion. And, yeah, then we get Scott Hall versus Bryan Adams, not the singer. Just why? It wasn't good at all. Scott Hall basically talks about the Kevin Nash promo. Bryan Adams ends up dominating him, getting out the outsider edge. And then would celebrate, before he won, getting on the ropes, and Scott Hall would hit the outsider edge for the 1, 2, 3. And then we get Ric Flair versus Eric Bischoff. There were a few other recaps, and there were constant recaps of Starrcade, the very stills of the Starrcade matches throughout this, so you could probably skip through a lot of this stuff and not really miss anything. Ric Flair versus Eric Bischoff for the control of WCW. Basically, Flair would get to run WCW for 90 days, even though he would declare himself president for life soon after. And the Horsemen and Mongo stop Eric Bischoff, who was trying to leave, get in the limo, and Benoit and his fabulous mullet and killer instinct got out there. And Dean Malenko and Benoit and also Mongo. I guess Mongo counted as a horse. I never liked Mongo at all. Mongo was an idiot. They stopped Bischoff from leaving. There was brawls because the Horsemen stopped everybody that was trying to interfere. Flair basically beat Bischoff up with a couple exceptions. And it was only given a few minutes because Bischoff wasn't really a wrestler and Flair shouldn't really be working a long match against Bischoff. And then the Giant comes down, saunters down. He comes in, goes to chokeslam Ric Flair. Randy Savage with Gorgeous George, the blonde girl, not the actual wrestler. That would be weird. Runs down and walks down. Wearing an NWO shirt, does this too sweet and everything. And then low blows the Giant, knocks him over the ropes, rips off the shirt as he's leaving the ring. And Ric Flair ends up slapping on the figure 4 on Eric Bischoff, and Bischoff taps out, and there you go. Ric Flair has control of WCW. Good ending to Nitro with a really good interview, insane interview with Flair. There was some nice Starrcade fallout, and the cruiserweight tag match was actually very good. This was a pretty sloppy episode though, so I'm not going to grade it. I mean, what's the point? But for a little nostalgia trip, it doesn't hurt to seek out some parts of this. And again, Flair versus Bischoff, crowd went absolutely nuts because they love Ric Flair. He'd been one of the, the mainstays in WCW even before it was WCW, when Baltimore was a really, really hot town. So yeah, that's really just about it. Again, we'll have a review of the Nitro and Raw Foley's title win versus the Finger Poke of Doom at some point. So anyway, do you agree? Do you disagree with what I said? Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. Spend real honesty with John Ritland, and I will see you soon.